The sun is out. It's time for the summer of freedom. Yes, I am sunburnt. This is a problem that we're not here to talk about today. What we're here to talk about is the fact that it's time to instigate the summer of freedom. What we've been through over the last couple of years, the repressive lockdowns, the coercive campaigns, the propaganda, the capture of institutions, really represents a much broader set of problems and a trajectory that is authoritarian in nature and indeed eroding at the very core of Western values and our liberties and human rights. And it's not just within the context and the wrapper of COVID-19 that we're seeing this happen. We are seeing an assault on our liberties and rights. So it's time not only to celebrate our freedoms, but mark and affirm our freedoms as a society and culture in order to ensure that both our freedoms and our rights are promoted and safeguarded going forward, but also to recognize democracy at its core and recognize that we as the people must stake our claim to the future. Because what we're witnessing right now has been an authoritarian, totalitarian takeover. We've seen this technocratic rise of this elite-driven, non-governmental organization sponsored, philanthro-capitalist system that has dominated our experience, not just for the last couple of years, but in recent years preceding this. And what is very clear is the trajectory we're on is posing a real threat to how we live our lives. Everything from the cancel culture, the erosion of freedom of speech, to what is being taught in our educational institutions. And in fact, on the notion of free speech, it was once said that speaking the truth is a revolutionary act. Well, the reality is now just speaking is a revolutionary act, let alone the truth, because quite frankly, people more and more so are feeling suppressed. You know, how many people during the course of COVID-19 lost their livelihoods because of their viewpoints? How many people lost their ability to post on social media and share their views openly because of their viewpoints? We are witnessing a cultural erosion of our freedoms. And as such, it's important that we celebrate and promote and safeguard those freedoms. And what's very interesting to me to observe in this modern world, post-pandemic, post-COVID world, is that many of the conditions that were witnessed during the counterculture movement of the 1960s are in many ways in parallel with what we're witnessing right now. Now, let's take a look back to the 1960s. The 1960s, when people think of counterculture, they typically think about the hippie movement during the 1960s, whereby it was really an anti-establishment cultural phenomenon that developed throughout much of the Western world through the mid-60s and early 70s, gaining momentum through the civil rights movement and through the pushback against the United States invasion in Vietnam. And this period of time, underpinned by sexual liberation, psychedelic experimentation, challenged the status quo and produced a counterculture that pushed back against a way of life that people were no longer willing to tolerate. And what was said at the time was the repressive and authoritarian power structures were adverse to the goals of freedom, peace, love, and unity. Now, those words couldn't be further, couldn't be more similar today, rather, than they were in the 1960s. But what's quite fascinating is many of the progressives from the 1960s who actually instigated the movement are now part of the establishment that we are challenging. That those that have fought for many forms of justice have become totalitarian in their approach and have deviated from the ideals of peace, love, and freedom, and have become institutionally technocratic in nature. So now the establishment, interestingly enough, has been formed by many of those people who had great ideals during the 60s and for whatever reason have now culminated in this more authoritarian and repressive view of the world in order to try and tackle the world's issues through command and control and suppressing people's rights and freedoms. So I believe the time has come for us to mount a new counterculture movement. And I've been speaking about this now since May 2020, given what we've been through. But now is really the time to galvanize, and the disparate movements that exist right now, not limited to those that have been fighting for freedom for the last couple of years, but more broadly, people who are people who share a vision for a free and open and peaceful world where individuals and societies flourish in harmony with one another and nature, where those amongst us see how personal empowerment and our own individual flourishing combines with social responsibility and cultural shifts that enable us to create these free and open societies, looking at how we can create cultural, economic, and political decentralization to break down the systems of power and control in order that greater opportunity and power is held within the hands of the people, looking at how we can restore the values of community, building resilient individuals as well as resilient communities, looking at how we can heighten our ecological awareness and get closer to nature once more, how we can tap into higher forms of consciousness and flow states with or without the aid of psychedelic drugs, and the acceptance of a more open, liberal, in the truest sense, in the classical sense, culture where we are able to live free lives, but to do so with responsibility for our neighbors and for our local communities and our nations. So I feel that now is the time for a counterculture movement. Now is the time to push back against the establishment that has its clutches holding deep upon not only institutions, the media, but civilian life in itself. And whilst we have our freedoms back from, or most of us do, from what has gone before us over the last couple of years with regards to the pandemic, really, if we are to create change, it begins with how we see the world. And how we see the world stems from our guiding philosophy and our guiding culture that underpins how we live. And if we are able to transform our systems and structures, then we must do so from a new place of thinking it, because the old consciousness that got us into these problems will not be the same consciousness that will get us out of these problems. So it's going to take changes in our thinking and our way of life in order to transform the world around us. And that begins with the gathering of like-minded people who are willing to question everything and to challenge authority and to do things differently. Because I said, speaking the truth has historically been a revolutionary act, but now people feel so suppressed that they are even afraid to speak for fear of reprisal. So we must push back against this culture, and we must find a way to create a movement that is grounded in freedom, peace, love, truth, and bring people together en masse to celebrate our freedoms and to promote the value of freedom in our modern Western cultures. Because right now, as I mentioned, there is a war, an attack on the way that we live our lives, everything from the emergence of a surveillance state to cancel culture, the cultural fragility that we're witnessing as a result of a decline in institutions, the social discontent, the division and polarization, the culture wars, the identity politics, the catastrophization of all things, the alarmism, the cultural safetyism, the lack of resilience that this has borne, the widening inequalities, the current inflation, economic stagnation combined with cost of living rising through astronomically, the widespread background anxiety, social isolation, and loneliness, the old materialist reductionist worldview of modernity, the lack of the spiritual dimension and moral and ethical frameworks that underpin our society has led to things like the rise of fundamentalism, totalitarianism, Machiavellianism, and in many cases, sociopathy. And now it's time for us to actually think differently. And it's in our hands in order to do that. And it's in our scope to gather in numbers and start to not only pontificate how we will begin to change the world, but actually start to transform our culture, identify local problems that need solving, and start to come together to create solutions. Because the key themes of personal empowerment, of decentralization, of self-actualization, of human consciousness, of spiritual awakening, these are the facets that will enable us to alter the course of history and really challenge the current state of the world so that we can build a new, free, open society in the shell of the old. To do so will require us to negotiate nuance. It will require us to tangle and untangle the complexity, embracing the messy, imperfect practice of moving towards a higher form of humanity. In order to do so, we will need to work locally, nationally, internationally to move things forward. And it's going to take some brave souls and individuals who are willing to put their head above the parapet and stand up for those things that are most important to us. Some of us have been doing that now for the last couple of years. We've come out in thousands, in millions across the world to defend our freedoms. Now that we have those some of those freedoms back, it's time not to rest on our laurels and wait for the impending next set of circumstances to lead us to action. We must now be proactive and seek to consciously create the world that we wish to see. And this is the beauty of the idea of the summer of freedom, because it is simply a notion, it's a concept that by bringing people together across disparate movements from all parts of different communities who have a common ideal for freedom, then by becoming together and gathering, we can start to establish and light the fire amongst that dry tinder that is existing within our communities to create the conditions for innovation, for grassroots activism, for campaigns, for change-making projects, whatever it takes in order to get there. And we will only do that by coming together to form solutions. So it is certainly within my own personal view that we can begin to turn the tide. What's wonderful to see outside the realms of the pandemic is more and more people are recognizing the situation that we're facing and are taking stock. So we at Elevate are looking to play our role within that such movement building. And we're going to pioneer the project of the Summer of Freedom. We are going to start to work towards regional groups, firstly in the UK, bringing our community together. We've reached over 10 million people in the last 2 years on the Elevate podcast, the Pandemic podcast, which preceded the Elevate podcast. And we've got a significant global community who are looking for leadership, but also looking to take initiative in their local communities. And we wish to be a catalyst for such a change. So we're building the Elevate Network as our platform for change. It's a place to challenge the status quo. It's a place to make sense of the current world that we're facing. And it's a place to pursue individual and societal transformation, because the reality is the change is in our hands. And it only takes a few of us who are willing to courageously move things forward working with our communities in order to actually start to instigate change. So we are here to take a long-term view. We are here to look at how we actually move things forward, how we actually start to design a civilization that promotes the ideals of peace, truth, love, and freedom. Because as it currently stands, the human aspect of humanity is the missing part. Whilst we need to look at how we can adjust and course correct the structures and the systems of power that govern our world, we can only do so if we shift our own worldview, and that begins with ourselves. It's easy to fall into nihilism or narcissism or fundamentalism and start to believe that it's some distant power that rules the world. But when we operate from such mindsets, then we remove all power within ourselves to alter the trajectory. When we start to other the opposition and demonize those that have created this situation, whilst it may feel comforting to do so, it often removes our own personal power to actually create, because we are the creators of our destiny. We are the authors of our future. And it's important that we recognize that we have the opportunity now, more so than ever before, to actually alter the course of history. I firmly believe right now that we are witnessing the birth of a counterculture movement. It's 2022. This is just the beginning. You know, I've labeled it the Summer of Freedom for the last 2 years. It will continue to be the Summer of Freedom until we've actually built a movement that is capable of transforming the culture that we live within. Because as it stands, you know, people are awakening on a day-to-day basis. But it's going to take more of us putting ourselves out there in our local communities, online, around the world, in order to translate big ideas into tangible action. So if like me, after the last couple of years, you are concerned about the trajectory that the world is on, and that you're not ready to disappear silently into the night and allow the world to simply unfold as it's currently unfolding, then I invite you to come and join us within the Elevate Network. This week on Wednesday, we're going to be making some announcements about the key changes we're making within the network in order to gear ourselves up to be a catalyst for the counterculture movement. You'll hear us talking a lot more about this, because in this historical moment, we do need a social, cultural, and political transformation more than ever. And it's time to demonstrate through our own being and our own actions that a world that is radically more connected, compassionate, democratic, free, healthy, and ecologically sustainable is not only possible, but it's instantly available to us when we start to act in such a way. And we are in need now of immense creativity, innovation, soul, determination, love, openness, willingness to change, willingness to act, if we are to navigate these challenges that we're facing and to bring about a new culture of freedom, peace, joy, love. And it's clear that within the world that we're operating, this culture already exists in embryonic forms throughout our networks and the wider world, but it's only going to become a movement as a result of mass collective efforts to catalyze, to organize, to grow, and to live it. And to do that, we must start to galvanize our actions and build a movement of movements across multiple planes of activity, across multiple issues, in order to instigate something that can go against the grain of this centralized technocracy that is emerging and secure freedom for humanity. It's my belief through peaceful rebellion, non-conformity, and creative experimentation that we will be able to create the conditions, firstly, for individual and then societal transformation. And whilst we are facing a new set of circumstances, what we're seeing right now has been experienced in the world before. But even if we do not have a blueprint or a roadmap or a master plan like some of those that we're going up against, we do have vision, desire, and skills to create the kind of world that we want to live in and share. So nobody is going to do it for you. We are the counterculture of the future. It's time to get organized. So if you wish to come and be part of the movement, you want to create a better world for your own existence, for your children and your children's children, then I encourage you to join us within the Elevate Network. We've got a big call coming up on Wednesday night where we're going to start talking about regional activation. We're going to start talking about a set of campaigns that we're going to look to build, but we're also going to talk about how we're going to create the conditions for creativity, because ultimately, first, it starts with a philosophy, a guiding philosophy for a modern world that is based upon freedom, peace, love, truth, prosperity, in order to create the culture that we live in, because the culture that we live in is no more than a reflection of the society that we're part of. So if we are able to instigate a shift in worldview, then when we start to look at how we can create change in the systems and structures of our world, whether that's politics, economics, finance, media, healthcare, then we do so from a place that respects those ideals. But it's important that we recognize that we all have a role to play. We all have skills, knowledge, talents, and skills and desires that can actually help us create this shift. So I invite you to join us. This is our part of the process. I'm sure, across the world, we'll see synergistic activity. Our goal within the Elevate Network is to build a network of movers and shakers who are out there willing to create a difference in the world, so we can share best practice, tools, principles that can make a difference. So no matter who you are, where you are in the world, do come and join us and join our call on Wednesday night, 8 p.m. UK time, where we're going to be talking more detail about how we're going to get things in motion and how you can get involved on a regional basis. In the beginning, we're going to kick things off in the UK, but we're already talking to people in the United States, Canada, Australia, various other parts of the world who wish to take this movement global. So this is the very beginning of a shift. It's a long road ahead. But over the last few years, disparate communities have evolved, erupted, emerged. Some of those have gone silent. Some of those have disappeared into the night. It's time to activate as much as possible now and recognize that the change, the future is in our hands. So head over to Elevate Network. We are elevate.org, and we invite you to be part of our movement. And together we can co-create a better world. So thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks for watching and sharing this. It's time to do the work, and I look forward to doing the work with you as we move forward and reclaim our freedoms in the summer of freedoms. All right. Peace and love. Have a wonderful evening. I'll see you soon.